flagging this on this program in April.
I have little doubt that the Chinese intelligence services are actively trying to steal America's intellectual property as it relates to the virus that they unleashed on the world. Because, of course, they want to be the country that claims credit for finding those drugs or finding a vaccine and then use it as leverage against the rest of the world.
Global investor Ray Dalio is back with us today with his assessment of the China threat and why it hasn't stopped him and others from investing there. All that and a lot more as we look ahead today on Sunday. But first, new revelations this week about Christopher Steele and his bogus dossier paid for by Hillary Clinton's campaign and the Democratic National Committee. Newly declassified documents providing even more evidence that the FBI knew that there was no collusion as early as January of 2017. But they kept investigating Trump and his campaign anyway and renewing warrants to do so. This just the latest domino to fall, with more bombshell documents expected any day now. White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows breaking that news with us right here last week.
We know that they not only knew that there wasn't a case, but they continued to investigate and spy, and yes, I use the word spy, on Trump campaign officials, and actually even doing things when this president was sworn in and after that, and doing it in an inappropriate manner. You're going to see a couple of other documents come out in the coming days that will suggest that not only was the campaign spied on, but the FBI did not act appropriately as they were investigating. It's all starting to come unravel, and I tell you, it's time that people go to jail and people are indicted.
Joining me right now to talk more about that is Senate Judiciary Committee Chairman Lindsey Graham. Mr. Chairman, it's great to have you once again. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
A big applaud goes to you for declassifying documents over the last week and really getting to the news and the truth. Thank you, Senator, for doing that. I know that our audience is grateful. I want to talk about what you declassified, and certainly you have articles in this from the New York Times where we see Peter Strzok, FBI agent, marking off the article saying there is absolutely no evidence of this. Tell us about the report that you declassified from the FBI, which is based on an interview with the subsource of Christopher Steele.
So there's two things that we declassified so the public could understand how corrupt Crossfire Hurricane actually was. Number one was a memo written by an intel analyst who spent 3 days interviewing the Russian subsource. I don't know about you, but I always thought the Russian subsource was somebody based in Russia in the bowels of the Russian government, risking their lives, trying to, to get information out to the Democratic Party. The Russian subsource, we now know, was on the payroll of Christopher Steele, and he also had a working relationship with the Brookings Institute. And we have learned from the memo that we declassified that the Russian subsource, who was American-based, not Russian-based, told Christopher Steele, here's what I've got. It's bar talk, it's a rumor, it's innuendo, it's not really reliable. And what did Christopher Steele do with that? He turned it into a Tom Clancy novel. He sold it to the FBI. They sold it to the FISA court to get a warrant against Carter Page. And what does this memo show? Then in January 2017, when they found the Russian subsource, who was in the United States, he disavowed the dossier as being reliable. The FBI knew it, did a 40-page memo, but the FBI continued to lie to the court, getting new warrants based on the dossier in April and June of 2017. After they knew it was a bunch of garbage, they continued to use it anyway. Somebody needs to go to jail.
So tell me about the criminality, because if that subsource told the FBI agent, this is all bar talk, this is all hearsay, why didn't the FBI stop renewing warrants to spy on Carter Page?
That's the central accusation that I'm trying to find out. I'm doing oversight. Durham's doing a criminal investigation. Here's what I can tell you, that Peter Strzok knew that the subsource was not reliable. In the notes that we declassified, where Strzok is commenting on the February the 14th New York Times article, he indicates in there that Steele does not have insight into the reliability of the subsource. So that tells me that Strzok knew about the interview with the subsource in January, where the subsource says it's all bar talk and hearsay. So Strzok has a duty to report to the court exculpatory information. He has a duty to notify his superiors that the key document to get a warrant against Carter Page, the Russian dossier, is no longer reliable. I find it impossible to believe that McCabe and Comey were not made aware of this 40-page memo. Think of it for a moment. What's the odds that somebody would go to the trouble of writing a 40-page memo, shredding the reliability of the Russian dossier, and not tell other people in the FBI about it? I think there's zero chance that happened. And anybody that knew that the Russian dossier was unreliable and continued to get a warrant against Carter Page based on that document should go to jail for defrauding the court.
So you are calling witnesses down to get interviewed in front of your committee. You've got Sally Yates coming soon.
Yeah.
Are you going to call Jim Comey and Andrew McCabe?
Yeah, absolutely, at the end. But I want to call Sally Yates. But let me tell you who I want to call for sure is I want to call the person who prepared the memo. I want to call the case agent who interviewed the subsource for 3 days in January and ask him, oh, by the way, did you tell anybody above you that the dossier is a piece of Russian disinformation? You know, they're laughing their ass off in Russia. This New York Times article that somehow this subsource has been compromised, nobody in Russia is mad at this subsource who is U.S.-based because the subsource took a bunch of Russian disinformation, sold it to Christopher Steele, who sold it to the FBI. What happened here is that Russian disinformation was used by American law enforcement in weapons form to go after a sitting president. They're laughing their ass off in Russia about this. They would give this guy a medal.
So tell me about the Sally Yates interview. That's happening on August 5th. That's coming up. What do you want to find out from Sally Yates?
Three things. Ms. Yates has previously testified that she met with President Obama and Vice President Biden, I think it was Comey and Brennan and a few others, to talk about the ongoing surveillance of General Flynn, who was the incoming National Security Advisor. At that meeting, she learned for the first time, and she's number 2 at the Justice Department on January the 5th, 2017, that the FBI was surveilling General Flynn. What shocked her the most is that Obama knew about it and she didn't. Now, what do I want to ask her? I want us to explain to us, how is it possible the President of the United States knows about a surveillance of the incoming National Security Advisor, General Flynn, and you didn't? And did she hear Vice President Biden mention whether or not Flynn may have violated the Logan Act? And I want her to explain to us what kind of system's in place. On January the 4th, the FBI agents in the field recommended dropping General Flynn from Crossfire Hurricane because there was no there. So really what I want to hear from Flynn is, how could Obama know and she didn't? And did Biden mention that we should be looking at Flynn in terms of a Logan Act violation? If he said that, that's contrary to what he's been saying publicly.
Well, what did they also say? What did the FBI say to Congress? Because I remember John Brennan being interviewed in testimony in front of Trey Gowdy, and he said to Trey Gowdy, we did not use the dossier. It was a small part of the overall mosaic. What about the FBI and what it told Congress? Is lying to Congress a 10-year felony, as Trey Gowdy has said on this program?
So stay tuned. Next week, you're going to learn more. Not only do we now know that the FBI lied to the FISA court about the reliability of the dossier, they told the court that the subsource was truthful and cooperative and Russian-based. The truth of the matter is that the subsource was American-based. He was an employee of Christopher Steele, who was on the payroll of the Democratic Party, and he told Christopher Steele, this is all a bunch of hearsay. And when the FBI understood that the dossier was no longer reliable, they continued to use it. But we also now have found, and this will come out next week, that Congress got suspicious about the Russian subsource and the reliability of the Steele dossier, and that members of Congress asked to be briefed about it. I will tell you next week what I found, and here's what I think I'm going to be able to show to the public. Not only did the FBI lie to the court about the reliability of the Steele dossier, they also lied to the Congress, and that's a separate crime.
So that's a second criminal act then.
And this is in 2018. So again, I want to emphasize this, that the Congress got suspicious, the intelligence community did, about Steele and the reliability of the dossier. The intelligence community did not want to include the dossier in the intelligence assessment provided to President Trump about the 2016 campaign because they didn't trust it. So they started asking questions at the FBI in 2018 about the subsource and how reliable this information was. And I found the notes that the FBI used to prepare that briefing Mr. Horowitz told us about them. I found them. Stay tuned next week. You're going to find not only did the FBI lie to the FISA court, they lied their ass off to the Congress.
Unbelievable. This is more breaking news. We will follow your reporting next week, Senator. Real quick before you go, you have been knee-deep and working on another package for the shutdown and the coronavirus response. Are we going to see you pass something before the Senate leaves on August 8th? What is the conversation now about those unemployment benefits, which will go away on July 31?
Well, here's the problem we have. 70% of the people almost on unemployment are making more unemployed than they did when they worked. We need to change that. State benefits are trying to replace 50% of lost wages. What Mnuchin wants to do is have a federal benefit to take it up to 70%. Our goal is to give you 70% of the money you lost by being unemployed, not to give you a pay raise in unemployment. We've got to fix that. We've got to take care of kids. We've got $100 billion in this package to safely get kids back to school, and hospitals are beginning to be overrun again by new admissions, and we got money to help our health care system. Half the Republicans are going to vote no to any Phase 4 package. That's just a fact. And a lot of Democrats are going to insist on $3 trillion, which would be way too much. It would be wasted money. I'm confident President Trump will lead us to a solution where we have money for kids, jobs, and health care. We need to stimulate the economy. We need a Phase 4, and I think we'll come together before August the 5th to get this done.
All right, we will leave it there. We'll be watching. Lindsey Graham, thanks for your leadership in all of this. We appreciate your time this morning, sir. Thank you. Senator Lindsey Graham joining us there. Quick break, and then coming up, Acting Secretary of Homeland Security Chad Wolf is here, live on what the federal government is doing to restore law and order across our country, with some mayors saying they're just not welcome. Back in a minute. Secretary, it is great to have you this morning. Thank you so much for joining us, and certainly your leadership on all of this is critical. Please explain to us the difference in terms of what's happening in Portland versus the response to other cities across our country where there is also crime and vandalism and in need of law and order.
Well, thanks for having me on this morning, Maria. What's going on in Portland is very different than any other city across our country today. What we have in Portland is every night, again, between midnight and 5 a.m., you have anywhere from 2,000 to 3,000, upwards to 4,000 violent individuals targeting federal property, federal courthouse there in Portland, and federal law enforcement officers. They are arriving every night using city streets and city parks. They're coming armed with rocks, bottles, baseball bats, power tools, commercial-grade fireworks, eliciting that violence and targeting their violence on federal courthouse and federal law enforcement officers. That's very different than what's going on in Chicago, places like Chicago, Albuquerque, Kansas City. That is where you see normal criminal activity, street crime, what we say, regarding gangs and drug dealers. And again, President Trump and the administration, led by the Department of Justice, is targeting that type of crime. But again, Portland is very different. What we see in Portland is a city, at least at certain hours of the night, completely out of control. We see city leadership there has fostered an environment that allows these criminals to do this throughout the night, untouched, absolutely untouched. It's time for Portland to join other responsible cities around this country working with federal law enforcement to address this violence. Just last night, Maria, we had protests across the country. We had some violent protests taking place in Seattle, in Oakland, in other cities. But what we saw there is we saw local and state federal law enforcement working with federal law enforcement, addressing those issues without major incidents. We need Portland to step up to the plate, do their responsibility, and work with us to address violent criminal activity occurring every night.
Well, Well, what if they don't, Secretary? I mean, something's got to give, right? I mean, this is going on every night that Portland looks like Baghdad, and they are pushing back on officers. These people can go all the way up to the fence and the perimeter and throw bricks at officers. What are you going to do about it?
Absolutely. Well, I will say that we're working very, very closely with the Department of Justice, the FBI, as well as others. And I will say that we're going to have additional actions probably as early as this week. We cannot continue to let law enforcement officers targeted and injured night after night after night. I just want to say we often hear from, again, city leaders and either other leaders, Oregon senators, who say there's not a lot of violence going on. It's mainly peaceful protesting. I would say to you, we have over 70 arrests. We have over 188 individual injuries. We've got over a dozen times it's been declared a riot that says otherwise. This is violent activity. We've got dozens of pictures, photos, videos, some of which we released, that say the complete opposite. So I think it's very important that Americans and your viewers understand what's going on in Portland. It is violent crime every single night. Again, I'm asking the city, the state to step up, do their job, work with federal law enforcement, and let's bring this to a peaceful conclusion. And let me just end by saying the department strongly supports individuals who want to peacefully protest. You want to exercise your First Amendment right? There is no concern. In fact, that happens in Portland every day. There's no incidents, there's no arrests, and we're fine. It's this violent criminal activity that has to stop.
Yeah, and you may actually have two of your agents permanently blind, God forbid, because they had lasers shined in their eyes. I want to take a short break and come back and talk about that, as well as a protest planned right outside of your house. Stay with us. More with Secretary Chad Wolf when we come right back. Welcome back. We are back live with Acting Secretary of Homeland Security Chad Wolf. Secretary, we were just going through the situation in Portland. I want to get to the other major cities of our country and the violence happening there. But why can't, before we finish on Portland, why can't you just arrest the leadership in Portland because of their, ignoring what's really happening on the ground?
Well, we absolutely are doing that. So we're working with the FBI there in Portland, with the U.S. Attorney's Office there in Portland, to address the leaders that are organizing this and then going after them. We're also making arrests every night. We made more than 7 or 8 arrests last night, and we'll continue to do that. We're continuing to hold these criminals accountable. If the city won't, the federal government will hold these folks accountable. And I think it's interesting. I've often been asked by a number of city officials, as well as, again, senators, to say just have DHS officers stay on federal property. If you stay on federal property, all will be fine. We did that Friday night, Maria, and over 7 officers were injured on federal property. So this has nothing to do with you stay on federal property and then we will peacefully protest. That is not the case. We know what their aim is. Their aim is to destroy that courthouse and injure law enforcement officers. We have them on video as saying that. We know what their goal is, and we're going to continue to protect and do our job.
How are your officers doing, your agents doing, who have lost eyesight because of the lasers shown at their eyes?
Well, I appreciate you mentioning that. We have 2 to 3 different officers. We are waiting on final results to see how much of their eyesight will permanently be lost because of the activity of these criminals. As you indicated, they are shining lasers, high powerful lasers, into officers' eyes as they emerge from the courthouse. So we're taking steps. We've taken steps to address that, and we'll continue to protect our officers at all costs. And again, all I need is the city of Portland to step up and do their job. These individuals are on city streets. They're in city parks arming themselves every night, and the city simply does nothing about it. Absolutely nothing. It's irresponsible, and it's very dangerous.
And right now, there are plans for a protest right outside of your home. What are you doing? What can you tell us about this other protest, which is really trying to single-handedly attack you?
Well, what I can tell you, Maria, is our officers in Portland every night are targeted. Their personal information is on the internet, put out there by these criminals, by these anarchists. They're identified. Their families are harassed. They go where they're staying. The doxing is prolific, and we're trying to address that. And, of course, we see them trying to do that to myself. We'll continue to do our job. We're not going to be deterred by this. This is a tactic that they have used for over 3 years, 3.5 years. We know what it is. We're prepared for it. At the end of the day, we're going to do our job. We're going to do our mission. The American people deserve that. And again, I go back to the most reasonable Americans understand what is at play in Portland, understand what the department is doing, what the president is doing, what the administration is doing. And that is we are standing up for law and order. And anyone who says otherwise is not being accurate. And I will say that the other side that wants to criticize law enforcement, what they don't do, they do not condemn these acts of violence in Portland. I have talked with a number of Democratic members of Congress, and all but one, only one, have asked me about the health of my officers. All they want to do is condemn law enforcement for doing their job. And again, very irresponsible.
Bernie Sanders would also like to defund the Pentagon. The Democrats want to cut defense spending as well. And real quick, give us your sense of what's happening in other cities across the country. Shootings are up 50% in New York. Crime, murder and shootings are up in Chicago. What's happening in other cities and how are you dealing with that? Tell us about Operation Legend.
Absolutely. So Operation Legend is a Department of Justice-led operation into a number of cities. It's been ongoing in Kansas City. It's also taking place in Chicago, Albuquerque, and a few others. And again, what we're doing is we're surging law enforcement assets into those cities to work on federal crimes that are being committed, whether it's gang violence or drug-related violence. And these are task forces that are occurring every day. And again, federal officers are doing that in conjunction with state and local law enforcement officers. So what we're doing is we're surging resources. The Department of Homeland Security, using our Homeland Security investigation agents, are supporting that effort. Again, trying to address some of the violent criminal activity that is occurring out in these cities that has gotten completely out of control. But I want to emphasize we're doing that with state and local partnership as we've done for the past several decades. Nothing's going to change there. We're going to continue to have that partnership with them. But what we are trying to do is we're trying to put additional assets into those cities so that we can investigate more, we can wrap up those investigations quicker, and we can make more arrests.
And is there a coincidence that many of these cities are being run by Democrat officials? I just want to talk quickly about policy and whether or not the Democrat policies are encouraging this. Nancy Pelosi the other day called your agents stormtroopers. You've got, just like you said a moment ago, you've got officials saying these are peaceful things, and they're not peaceful. What do you say about all of these cities, which we're going to show on camera now, being run by Democrats?
Or the Gestapo or thugs. It's absolutely irresponsible. It's dangerous, and she should immediately apologize for that. What we, again, see across these cities is violent crime occurring. We'll continue to surge resources, not only in Portland, but in other cities across the country. But I do want to make a distinction, which we talked about at the top of this segment. What is going on in Portland is very different than any other city across the country. And that relationship with the federal law enforcement officers and those state and local law enforcement officers is very different in Portland as it is anywhere else. So I want to make sure that everyone's clear about that and there's no confusion.
Understood. Thank you so much, Secretary. Great to have you this morning. We so appreciate it. Acting Homeland Security Secretary Chad Wolf. We'll be right back with Devin Nunes live. He's got breaking news on the Russian collusion hoax, the coup that failed. You will never believe which prestigious Washington think tank he says has links to developing the dossier. Next. Welcome back. Congressman Devin Nunes was among the first lawmakers to question the Russia collusion hoax as then chairman of the House Intel Committee, telling us right here on this program 3 years ago that the FBI engaged in a coup to take down a sitting president. This week, he joined me on Mornings with Maria over on Fox Business with some breaking news on the Steele dossier. Watch.
Where we now see direct links between the Brookings Institute leadership and the creation, possibly, of the Steele dossier and the dissemination of the Steele dossier. I think they have real questions that need to be answered here about what on earth was the president of Brookings doing, texting back and forth to Steele. Why was he accepting the dossier?
Joining me right now with an update is Congressman Devin Nunes. He is the ranking member of the House Intel Committee. Congressman, it is always a pleasure to see you. Thank you for being here. We have this breaking news this morning as the subsource of the dossier, Igor Danchenko, has been unmasked. Tell me about this subsource and his ties to Brookings?
Well, thank you, Maria. Thanks for having me on. You may remember a couple months ago I was on your show and I talked about that we were really looking at 3 Russians. And as Senator Graham said at the beginning of the show, it ends up that we actually weren't looking for the third one was actually not a Russian at all. He actually sounds like he lives here in America. And, you know, the FBI led Congress to believe that, and the media led Congress to believe, and they led the American public to believe that somehow Steele had this really super secret source that nobody could know about. Well, it ends up that he used to work for the Brookings Institute. It looks like there were a lot of connections to the Brookings Institute, which for those of your viewers who don't know what this is like the prominent left-wing think tank here in our nation's capital. So we're investigating now and have been, we had these links earlier on. People may remember the president of Brookings back in 2016. We know that he had given the dossier to a few people. We had that through testimony. You also may remember that the State Department was involved and there were additional dossiers that weren't the Steele dossiers, except that they mirrored the Steele dossiers. And we think there's a connection between the president of Brookings and those dossiers that were given to the State Department that mirrored the Steele dossiers, which, look, all of this, what does this mean? This was the Clinton campaign's dossiers. It was the dirt. It was a phony story that they sold not only to the American people, but they sold it and corrupted our FBI, where it appears like these dirty cops were more than willing to take this information and present it to the FISA court. So here's the final point on Brookings. So here's the final point. So we've now expanded our investigation, full-blown investigation into the Brookings Institute, and it really centers on 2 issues. One is the IRS. This is a tax-exempt organization. They're supposed to stay out of politics. They clearly have not done that. They've obstructed our investigation with propaganda for the last 4 years. It's, you know, well known that they've attacked our investigation for 4 years through this kind of phony legal group of fact checkers that they set up. So we need to look at there, see if they have been involved in politics. Secondly, they also take foreign money from foreign countries and foreign governments. And we need to know what foreign governments were involved in this, because were they acting on behalf of a foreign power? You know, everybody's questioned, you know, for all this time when it was, you know, the Trump campaign and Republicans were involved with Russians. Well, who was the Brookings Institute? Who are their foreign donors? And are they doing all of this not just to help the Democratic Party, but also any foreign government?
Well, what this all tells me, including the subsource revealed, is that there was indeed collusion in this country, but it was collusion with Hillary Clinton and the Democrats. Is that a fair statement?
Well, yeah, and it also just goes to show you that this was some sick fantasy that was made up by the Clinton campaign and their operatives. You know, and think of this. You had people in the media. Remember this whole thing about prostitutes and P-tapes in Moscow? These fools were running around all over Europe in Moscow, the leading institutions, these supposed leading reporters. But, you know, nobody calls them out on that. And the whole thing was like some sick fantasy made up by the Clinton campaign.
Well, many of them actually got Pulitzer Prizes for their reporting. I want to ask you about Robert Mueller, because these items that were declassified clearly indicate that the FBI knew that the dossier was fake, that the dossier was hearsay and bar talk. How come Mueller didn't unearth these things? I mean, let's watch Robert Mueller when he testified in front of Congress to listen to what he said about things like Fusion GPS. Roll the clip.
When you talk about the firm that produced the Steele reporting, the name of the firm that produced that was Fusion GPS. Is that correct?
I'm not familiar with that.
Let me just help you. It was. It's not a trick question. Right? It was Fusion GPS.
I'm not familiar with it. You have unearthed all of these things, Lindsey Graham declassifying the evidence that the FBI knew the dossier was garbage, and he had no recollection? I don't understand. Where was Mueller in all of this, Congressman?
Well, look, I think the question is does Mueller know where Mueller is? Okay, this was somebody who was put up as an avatar to give credibility to this investigation that was phony from the beginning. Okay, so I'm not talking about just in 2016. I'm talking about the day that Mueller walks in the door. I'm not sure he knows what the hell's going on. And clearly, a couple of years later, when he testifies before Congress, to not know who Fusion GPS is was astounding. And you know, look, the Democratic Party, it's very odd for a party that seems to be, against white people and always talking about racism. They sure like to prop up these avatar old white dudes. Where, I mean, they have one run for president right now who's hiding in his basement, who won't answer questions. What was his involvement? Their presidential candidate, supposedly went after and was the one who concocted this idea to use the Logan Act to investigate the Trump campaign and the incoming president, by the way.
Well, you've made 14 criminal referrals with a 15th pending. We are waiting on John Durham to investigate that. We're going to hear more from John Durham soon, I assume. Let me move on real quick about the technology CEOs testifying, not in front of your committee, but they're going to be testifying this week in the House in front of the Judiciary Committee. You have said conservative censorship is the most important issue ahead of the 2020 election. What do you want to hear from people like the head of Twitter, the head of Google, et cetera, when they testify this week?
Well, look, Congress gave these guys special powers so that they could create companies so that people could go and use the internet. It was supposed to be an open public square. Think of it as a public square where everyone, as long as they're following the law, they can go out there and state their case and participate in that public square. What's happened here is that Facebook and Google and Twitter are partisan hacks for the Democratic Party and the left. And so what's happening is, think of that, go back to that public square example, they're deciding who gets to go into the public square. So the good thing will be is that we're actually going to have the Parler CEO who's going to testify. And you can follow me at Parler, at Devin Nunes at Parler, and he's been on your show, Maria. They have that town square, and they're letting all Americans go there and express their views.
We got to jump. Congressman, it's good to see you. Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
Devin Nunes. We'll be right back.